Long before Moses was ever born, Egypt had a problem, or at least, that's how Pharaoh saw it. Generations earlier, a man named Joseph had risen to power in Egypt and invited his entire family, the children of Israel, to come live there during a famine. They settled in a region called Goshen, and for years, things were good. The Israelites multiplied, grew strong, and thrived. But Joseph eventually died, and the pharaohs who came after him didn't remember what Joseph had done for Egypt. All they saw was a foreign population inside their borders, growing faster than their own. And that made them nervous. A new pharaoh, fearful that the Israelites might one day side with an enemy in war, decided to act. He enslaved them. He put taskmasters over them and forced them into brutal labor, building entire cities of brick and stone for the Egyptian empire. Still, the Israelites kept growing. Slavery didn't slow them down. If anything, the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied. So Pharaoh escalated. He ordered the Hebrew midwives to kill any baby boy the moment he was born. The midwives, fearing God more than they feared Pharaoh, quietly refused and made excuses when questioned. So Pharaoh issued an even darker decree to his entire kingdom. Every baby boy born to the Hebrews was to be thrown into the Nile River. This is the world Moses was born into. His parents, Amram and Jochebed, were Israelites from the tribe of Levi. When Jochebed gave birth to a son, she looked at him and simply could not bring herself to hand him over to die. So she hid him. For 3 months, she kept him concealed in her home, somehow managing to keep his existence secret. But a baby grows and a baby cries, and eventually hiding him at home wasn't going to work anymore. So Jochebed made a decision that took an enormous amount of courage and trust. She wove a basket out of papyrus reeds and coated it with tar and pitch to make it waterproof. She placed her son inside it, and she carried it down to the Nile, the very river that was supposed to be his grave, and set it among the reeds at the water's edge. Then she left her infant son's older sister, Miriam, to stand watch at a distance, to see what would become of him. It wasn't long before Pharaoh's own daughter came down to the riverbank to bathe. As she walked along the water, she spotted the basket tucked among the reeds and sent one of her attendants to retrieve it. When she opened it, she found a crying baby boy inside. Immediately, she understood what was happening. This had to be one of the Hebrew children, hidden from her father's death order. But instead of feeling anger or fear, something in her was moved with compassion. She made up her mind on the spot. She would keep him and raise him as her own. This is where the story takes a quietly remarkable turn. Miriam, who had been watching the whole time, stepped out from her hiding place and approached the princess. She asked, with all the innocence of a young girl, whether the princess would like her to find a Hebrew woman to nurse the baby. The princess agreed. So Miriam ran off and brought back Jochebed, the baby's actual mother, without realizing it. Pharaoh's own daughter ended up paying Moses' birth mother to nurse and raise her own son. For his earliest years, for as long as that arrangement lasted, Jochebed had her son back, even if only temporarily. Even if she knew this baby ultimately belonged to someone else now. When Moses was old enough, likely around weaning age, he was brought to live in Pharaoh's palace. As the adopted son of the princess, she named him Moses, a name that echoes the Hebrew phrase drawn out, because, as she put it, she had drawn him out of the water. And so the boy who was born into slavery, who was meant to be drowned at birth, grew up instead inside the most powerful household in Egypt. We don't know a great deal about Moses' childhood in the palace. The ancient text moves quickly past those years, but we can imagine what it might have meant. He would have been educated as Egyptian royalty, trained in the language, customs, religion, and politics of the empire that enslaved his own people. He likely knew, on some level, where he came from. His nurse, after all, had been his own mother, and it's reasonable to think she found ways to make sure he never forgot his Hebrew identity, even while he lived as a prince. This created a kind of double life for Moses. By birth and blood, he was a Hebrew, a son of slaves. By upbringing, status, and privilege, he was an Egyptian, raised in luxury, likely educated alongside other members of the royal household, possibly being groomed for some role of influence within the kingdom. He existed in the gap between two identities, belonging fully to neither world, yet shaped by both. That tension came to a head when Moses was a grown man. One day, he went out among his own people. The text says he went out to his brothers and saw firsthand the brutal conditions of their slavery. While he was watching, he saw an Egyptian taskmaster savagely beating a Hebrew slave. Something inside Moses broke. He looked around to make sure no one was watching, and in a moment of fury, he struck the Egyptian down and killed him. Then, panicking, he buried the body in the sand, thinking he'd covered his tracks, but word travels. The very next day, Moses went out again and saw two Hebrew men fighting with each other. He tried to intervene, asking why one was striking the other. The man's response cut deep. "Who made you a ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Moses realized, with a sinking feeling, that what he'd done was known. And sure enough, when Pharaoh heard about it, he wanted Moses dead. So the prince of Egypt became a fugitive. Moses fled, leaving behind the palace, the privilege, the only life he'd really known as an adult, and ran east into the desert, into a land called Midian. Exhausted from his journey, Moses sat down by a well, the natural gathering place in that arid region. While he was there, 7 sisters, daughters of a Midianite priest, came to draw water for their father's flocks. But a group of shepherds showed up and tried to drive the women away. As apparently happened often, Moses, perhaps instinctively protective, or perhaps just unwilling to watch another injustice happen in front of him, stood up and helped the women, then watered their flock himself. When the sisters returned home earlier than usual, their father, a priest named Jethro, also called rule in parts of the story, asked why. They explained that an Egyptian, for that's what Moses appeared to be, given his upbringing and dress, had rescued them from the shepherds and even drawn water for their flock. Jethro was somewhat baffled that they'd left this stranger out there and told them to invite him to eat with them. Moses accepted, and what began as a meal turned into something much longer. He ended up staying with Jethro's family and eventually married one of the daughters, a woman named Zipporah. They had a son together, whom Moses named Gershom, a name that means a foreigner there, reflecting how Moses felt about his life in this new land. He had gone from prince to fugitive to, now, a shepherd, tending the flocks of his father-in-law in the quiet wilderness of Midian. This chapter of Moses' life lasted a long time, by most accounts, around 40 years. 40 years is a long stretch of obscurity for a man who had once lived in a palace. The dramatic, high-stakes world of Egyptian politics was entirely behind him instead. His days were the slow rhythm of herding sheep and goats across desert terrain, learning the wilderness, learning patience, presumably learning things about himself that the palace never could have taught him. Meanwhile, back in Egypt, conditions for the Israelites had not improved. If anything, their suffering deepened as the years passed. The Pharaoh who had wanted Moses dead eventually died himself, but the slavery continued under his successors. The Israelites groaned under their burdens and cried out for relief. According to the story, God heard their cries and remembered the promises made generations earlier to their ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that their descendants would become a great nation. That it was during this long, quiet exile that the turning point of Moses' life arrived. One day, while tending Jethro's flock, Moses led the sheep to the far side of the wilderness, near a mountain known as Horeb, later understood to be the same place as Mount Sinai. There, he noticed something strange: a bush, ablaze with fire, yet not being consumed by the flames. Curious, Moses thought to himself that he needed to go see this remarkable sight, to understand why the bush wasn't burning up. As he approached, a voice called out from the middle of the bush, "Moses, Moses, here I am," he answered. The voice told him to stop where he was, to take off his sandals, because the ground he stood on was holy. Then the voice identified itself: "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." Moses, the text says, hid his face, afraid to look at God. What followed was the moment that would change everything. God told Moses that he had seen the suffering of his people in Egypt, had heard their cries, and was concerned about their hardship. He was going to rescue them, and he was sending Moses to do it. Moses was to go to Pharaoh, the very king of the empire that had once raised him as a prince, and demand that the Israelites be set free. Moses, once a man of impulsive action who'd killed an Egyptian without hesitation, was now a man transformed by decades in the wilderness, humbler, perhaps more cautious, certainly less confident. He resisted. "Who am I," he asked, "that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" God answered simply that he would be with him. Moses pressed further, asking what he should tell the people if they wanted to know who had sent him. God gave him a name to carry back. "I am who I am. Tell them I am has sent me to you." It was a declaration of God's eternal, self-existent nature, and a name that would define this God of Israel from that point forward. Still, Moses wasn't convinced he was the right man for the job. He worried the people wouldn't believe him. So God gave him miraculous signs to perform, turning his shepherd's staff into a snake, making his hand temporarily leprous, and then healing it again. Signs meant to prove that God had truly sent him. Even then, Moses begged off one more time, insisting he had never been a skilled speaker, that he was slow of speech and tongue. This time, God's patience showed a hint of frustration, but he provided a solution rather than letting Moses off the hook. Moses' brother Aaron, still living in Egypt, would meet him and serve as his spokesman, while Moses would be the one who received God's instructions directly. And so, finally out of objections, Moses said goodbye to Jethro, gathered his wife and son, and turned his face back toward Egypt, the land he'd fled as a frightened fugitive, now returning as a reluctant deliverer, carrying nothing but a shepherd's staff and an extraordinary promise. It's here, at the border of Egypt, that the prince-turned shepherd becomes something new entirely, the man who will confront the most powerful ruler in the world and demand the freedom of an enslaved nation. The deliverer's mission was about to begin.